Hello, welcome back. Thanks so much for stopping by today. I hope you guys have grabbed your favorite coffee or tea or whatever it might be that you enjoy drinking while you're watching these videos. For me, I do 1 cup of coffee in the morning. That's it for the rest of the day. I also really like a good iced chai latte. So that would be something like a special treat in the afternoon if I need a little something. But usually I'm a 1 cup of coffee a day girl. Do you guys have a favorite beverage that you like drinking when you're watching the YouTube videos? Because I feel like sometimes we just settle in and start watching. So I hope that's what's on the agenda for you this morning. For this video, what's on the agenda is a fun cupcake mix recipe tutorial. This is a tutorial that I've wanted to share with all of you for quite a while, and we are finally going to get that done. But before we dive into that, I wanted to let you know, for those of you that have watched last week's video when I chatted about Eleni and her quilt, that silly girl has her quilt completely done. I cut it out for her. She did all of the sewing, all of the pressing, everything. All I did was cut it out for her. She did everything else herself. Ryan and I were out with friends last night, and she stayed at home, and she texted me a picture about midway through our evening of the completed quilt. And I didn't even know she was gonna sit down and work on it, so it was really neat that she's done. So I'm gonna be showing that to you guys probably next week. I want to do a video that shows the quilt, and then also a whole chatty video about homespun fabrics, because when I was showing those fabrics, along with my yellow brick road quilt, which was also made using homespuns, I got a lot of questions about homespun fabrics. And I've shared information before on my blog about sewing with wovens, but I thought it might be nice just to do sort of a renewed informational video about homespun fabrics. So if you have questions, you may have left them last week, but if you didn't, or if you have something new that you wondered about homespun specifically, feel free to leave those questions below, and I'm going to try to touch on some of those common questions that I get. For example, pre-washing, how do we fix the raveling when you pre-wash? What else? Can we mix them with quilting cottons? How are they different from quilting cottons? You know, those sorts of things. So if these are some of the things that you have been wondering about, feel free to leave me more questions below, and I will do my best to answer those next week and show you her completed quilt. She's so happy with it, and I think it turned out just great. So that's fun. That was a quick project because we did fabric shopping on a Wednesday, and she had it all completed by a Sunday. So when I am filming this, you know, I said last night would have been Sunday evening. So you guys might not have the exact dates when you're watching this on a Saturday morning. You might be thinking, oh, they were out on a Friday night, but the dates don't always jive with when I'm filming. So Wednesday to Sunday, she had a completed quilt from picking out the fabrics, cutting, and then sewing. So she was determined to get that one done quickly. All right, let's dive into this cupcake mix recipe tutorial. For those of you unfamiliar with cupcake mix papers, this is what they look like. Now, you might be familiar with some of the different piecing paper options that we have. I pulled 2 of these. This is an economy block foundation paper, and this is a vintage kite quilt block foundation paper. If you use triangle paper to piece your half square triangles, that would be another example of this sort of paper. So even if you are not specifically familiar with cupcake mix paper, you might be familiar with this technique in general. The way cupcake mix papers work is they are designed to work with charm packs, which is wonderful because sometimes we buy these cute little charm packs and maybe we're unsure how to use them or the project we have in mind. This is a kind of a fun, neat, different sort of way that we can piece our charm packs. There is also a layer cake option for the 10-inch squares, which is wonderful. And there are multiple packs which you end up with different pieces. So this is cupcake mix recipe number 1. If you have this recipe pack, you are going to see what you need here and what the resulting pieces are. So if you're using this pack, you're going to also need a pack of prints, a charm pack of prints, and a charm pack of a solid. I'm using coriander seeds, which is a white on white charm pack of various white on white prints. And then I pulled this lighthearted charm pack by Camille Roskeli, which is all sorts of pretty reds, pinks, and aquas. and we're going to be pairing those two together. So I've grabbed my 2 charm packs. Now it also shows you what you could do in place of the solid or white on white option here is to purchase background fabric and cut 42 5-inch squares. And it states that you would need 7/8 yard of fabric. So purchase an extra yard of fabric if you wanted to swap out this second charm pack. And then this part down here, the next section, shows you what the resulting pieces will be once you sew everything together. Each recipe card, which includes the recipe card, and then you add 1 print charm pack square and 1 print background square, is going to yield 1 3-inch finished half square triangle and 4 1.5-inch finished half square triangles. And as we work our way through this tutorial, you're going to see how this comes together. If you take 2 of the assembled recipe cards, you can make a 6-inch block, and you can lay out your half square triangles in so many different ways. Now you might be wondering, well, what do we do with these pieces after we have them? I'm going to show you my plan for what I am going to make, but really the options are very unlimited. You can put them together in so many fun ways. You can make something small. Maybe you want to make just a baby quilt. Maybe you want to purchase 2 of these cupcake mix recipes and put them all together and make something larger. I am using just the one here. I am going to end up with a throw-sized quilt if my plan pans out as I am thinking, and I'm going to be sharing that with you here. Now, I mentioned that there were a number of different cupcake mix recipes. So if you were to purchase a different numbered recipe, you might end up with 2 half square triangles plus a 4-patch. Some of them yield 4-patch units or 2-patch units. And so you can really just make so many different projects. This is fun for those of you who are creative, but creative in the quilt design part of quilt making, but might not know exactly where you want to start, might not know what size pieces fit together well. This gives you the option to kind of design a little bit. You're working with your base pieces, but how you lay them out is entirely up to you. So it does allow you to be pretty creative with these. So let's open this up and take a look at what it looks like on the inside. So as we read down through this information here, it gives us basic techniques for how we're going to be utilizing our cupcake paper. Let me flip this around so you can see this first. Our cupcake paper, just 42 sheets in here, along with our charm packs. So as we look here, it's going to give us some good information. It tells us not to starch or size or pre-wash the charm squares. Use the squares right from the package. You don't want any shrinkage on these or they will not fit with your charm square. You are going to be sewing with your lighter square on top, and you're layering your 2 squares right sides together. It tells you to line up your square with the outside pinked edges. You might find that your squares run a little roomy, and you'll just center those right in place. I'll show you that. And then you're going to want to pin, or if you've been around here for any length of time, you know I don't pin that often, and I usually don't pin when I am using these. But if you are a pinner, you want to pin to keep your squares in place with your cupcake mix paper so that there's no shifting while you're sewing. And the seam allowances, it states, are a scant 1/4 inch. And then it also says you can press seams in one direction or press open. I'm going to opt to press open so that I can really pivot my half square triangles throughout the quilt as I like without having to worry about any bulk when I am joining pieces together. It also gives you 2 different layouts showing that if you make 16 6-inch blocks and use 32 recipe cards, you'll end up with a little square quilt, 24 by 24. If you use 81 3-inch blocks, which uses all 42 recipe cards, you'll end up with a finished size of 27 by 27 without sashing. Of course, sashings and borders are something that you could opt to add in if you wanted to. Now, let's take a look here at what we are working with. So like I said, if you have sewn with triangle paper, it's probably going to feel pretty familiar to you, but you have marked sewing lines and you have marked cutting lines. So the cutting lines are going to be the solid lines and your sewing lines are the dashed lines. They are numbered on the pad so you can see how you work your way through, and I'm going to demonstrate on the sewing machine how we work our way through the sewing. And there's also a star up here at the top that shows you where you start sewing. So let's just go ahead and dive into this. I'm going to open up these charm packs here. And I'm probably just going to leave these two in the order that they are and pair them right together. Let's get rid of that paper here. There we go. So we're going to pair these two together. And then you're going to take off just one piece of paper. Set that to the side. And this is going to rest right on top. And it fits very nicely right on there. Like I said, depending on your charm packs that you're using, you're just going to want to center this paper. If you have a little excess room around the perimeter, that's fine. And actually, let me move this a little closer here again. You can see that you have a little bit of space around the perimeter with this solid line. So we are going to be trimming it down just a little bit. So we won't be using all of the charm squares quite to the edge. Now let's just take this over to the sewing machine. I'm going to show you how this works. Make sure I've got everything turned on. This little light, I'm going to turn this on too, because these Juki sewing machines, while very nice, don't have a lot of light in my sewing machine bed. So I have been using this little light. The same video where I mentioned I could do a cupcake recipe tutorial is the same video where I started using this light, and that is that Moda mystery unboxing that I did a couple years ago. It's been a couple years. So I'm going to link to that video so you can hear my first thoughts about this light. I chatted just a wee bit about the cupcake mix paper, so I'll link to that video if you want to watch it, but I have continued using this light. I find it lights up this bed very nicely and makes it just a bit brighter there on my sewing machine bed. All right, so I've got everything kind of lined up here. And one thing that you do want to do when you are using any papers of any sort, whether it's this one or triangle paper or whatever paper it might be, is you want to lower your stitch length, because that is going to allow your paper to tear away nicer from your pieces after you have sewn it together. So I'm going to set my Juki to about 1-ish. It's a little bit above 1, but definitely a shorter stitch length there. And we are going to start sewing here. Now, if you have a sewing machine that ends with your needle up, you're going to want to set it so it ends in the needle down position, because we are going to be doing some pivots. And if you have it land needle down, that's going to just work a little bit nicer for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and start sewing here. I'm sewing on that number 1. I said Eleni used my sewing machine last. She had it set a little slower, so I'm going to bump that up a little faster. I'm sewing on the number 1 right here, and I'm going to go all the way down. Let me grab my stiletto here. I'm going to go all the way down to right here where we see this solid line, and that's where we make the pivot and continue going this direction. So we're just going to sew down through here. Try to keep my hands out of the way so you can see nicely. And once I get right, one more stitch, one more, I'm going to raise my sewing machine foot and pivot down the other direction. I have an open toe foot on my machine right now, so I can easily see that line as I am sewing. And you're just going to stay on that line. This is the number 2 line, and I'm going to take this right off the edge of the paper because we're going to completely rotate it for the next seam line. All right, there we go. So that is what we have so far. So I have sewn right down this line here, and I've sewn down this line here. And now we're going to start again. We're going to sew right down this number 3 line down to this here. There we go. As we near that solid line, one more, and then pivot around, and we're going to sew here on the number 4. So you can see we're just making our way around the dashed lines following the numbered order. And here again, I'm going to sew right off the edge because we're making a complete rotation. So now we have the number 4 and the number 3 lines sewn here. The last line that we need to sew is our number 5 line. You're just going to want to start a little bit outside the perimeter of this solid line right here. And we're going to sew all the way across to the other side. And there we go. Okay, so we have sewn on all of our lines. So here is what this looks like now. You can see that we have all of the sewing done on all of our dashed lines. That's all completed. So the next step that we need to do is to cut everything apart on these solid lines. And it shows us that we're going to cut this line first. That's what that wording there says, cut this long line first, and then we'll go in and trim on all of the other solid lines. So let's just go ahead and do that. Starting with that very longest line. We're going to cut these all apart. So there is that one. And then we have a solid line here, here, and then we need to do this perimeter here as well. So let's just work our way through this. Actually, I'm going to save myself a little bit of time if I do this perimeter edge first. So let's do that. Now you guys, I'm cutting towards myself, which isn't something that I would recommend you to do, but I like having the majority of my ruler on top of my piece. If I had put this down here like so, I would have had just a little bit of ruler on top of my piece, and then there could have been a little bit more wiggle room. So for example, this next one, and I could have rotated my piece around. That would have been what I would have told you to do. Just rotate your piece until you have it in a nice way. This one right here would be another example. If I do this and trim it right now, I have just that little bit underneath of my ruler, and that is going to allow this piece to wiggle a little bit more. But if I rotate this piece all the way around to this side, this is going to allow me to cut this way with the majority of my ruler on top of my piece and not having to cut towards myself. So this would be the way I would tell you to cut it, so that you have a nicer, your ruler's where you want it and you're not cutting towards yourself. That's just not as safe to cut toward yourself. So there we have that piece. We can rotate here and trim this next solid line. These don't matter, the order that you cut these in. And then we'll cut this next one here. We have one more to cut, this one right here. So you can see we are constructing those smaller half square triangles. We end up with 4 of them here. This is what they're going to look like once they're pressed and the paper is removed. And there's those. And then we still need to trim this guy here. So we have just this side and then this side that we need to cut here. I'll do that one. Pivot this around. If you have a rotating mat, now is a nice time to utilize that, and then trim that as well. And that gives us our one larger half square triangle. So now you can see how that paper allowed us to make the 4 little half square triangles and then the one larger half square triangle. The next thing that I am going to do is to remove this paper. This should come off pretty nicely because we have shortened our stitch length, but I usually just give it a little fold and then just tug this off. And then the other side should come off pretty nicely there too. So that paper is removed. We do the same thing for these little guys. If you have forgotten to shorten your stitch length, or if you're running into any trouble with this paper removing, you can spritz it with a little bit of water, and that can sometimes help. Be a little bit careful when you are pulling off right here at the start of a seam. You don't want to pull that apart, but having the shorter stitch length does help those stitches stay in place too. So we're just removing our paper. And then the next step would be to iron this. Like I said, I'm going to be ironing everything open so that I can lay these out however I want to. One more. And there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and get my iron set up so that I can show you the pressing on these. Pretty straightforward. I am going to be using my You and Me Woolly pressing bar because I really love using that pressing bar for pressing seams open specifically. So let me get that set up for you. All right, let's go ahead and get these pieces pressed. If you are a seam press open sort of person and you don't use a pressing bar, you probably know that it works best to press to one side and then go back in and press open, as opposed to just going in and pressing open from the start. When you use a pressing bar, and there are a lot of different options available to us in this tool, but when you use a pressing bar, you can skip the pressing to the side part and just go right in and press it open. I don't have an ironing board here. I'm just on my bar, so I'm not going to go through and press again from the top, but this is what it looks like after just one press, and that just opens those seams up so nicely. Now I will need to trim those dog ears. You could trim those before pressing, but I'm going to press and then trim. There we go. You can see how slick that is. Just presses open so nicely, and it's pretty speedy. That's one of the things that I don't care for about pressing open, is it does take a little bit more time, but I do think these pressing bars really streamline the pressing process. So we have one more little guy, and then the big one. There we go. Just that easy. We have all of those pressed. Like I said, they do still need their little ears trimmed off, but that won't take very long to trim those. So that's a look at how you would use Cupcake mix recipe paper. I will just continue grabbing my squares. I'm gonna move that out of the way. Just continue grabbing my squares along with a sheet of paper and continue making more of these half square triangles until I have completed the whole pack. So that's going to make quite a few half square triangles, and let me show you what my plan for these is. I did take time to think about how I might like to put these together, and I think what I'll do is make blocks like this. This is going to make really cute little half square triangles that are also square and a square type units, and then I'm going to put the larger half square triangles in the prints in the outer corners, and that is going to create a really interesting pattern when the blocks are placed side by side. So this is a 6-inch finished block. This is what the quilt will look like once I have, let's see, how many did I do here? 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is 4 by 5. So this is going to be 26-inch finished blocks. So that will give me 24 inches by, let's see, 5 times 6, 30. So we have 24 by 30. Which is a pretty small quilt, and I didn't necessarily want to do any more piecing, so I'm going to do really large borders. Now, depending on what you are wanting your resulting quilt to be, what you're going to be using it for, you're going to make a different decision. When I am making projects that I don't necessarily know what I'm going to end up doing with them, I tend to go kind of throw sized. I'm going to be making this in a 48 by 60 inch size, which works really well for donation quilts that I will do, or gifting quilts, baby quilts, toddler quilts, snuggle up on the quilt, snuggle up on the couch sized quilts. It's just a really nice size. Plus, the other thing that I like about that size is it allows me to back using a 60-inch wide minky without having to piece my backing. So I always keep that in mind too. If I know that I am not wanting to piece my backing, if I know that I might be using minky, I will really consider what size quilt I'm going to end up with. So this is kind of what I'm thinking I might do. Not necessarily this fabric. I pulled this over here to the side. I'm looking at using one of these two fabrics. These are both from my Beautiful Day line, so I could do either red roses or pink roses, and I do think that it looks really pretty with these fabrics, either one of these. So I'll probably piece it and then make a decision once I have it pieced, but you can kind of see how nicely that plays with either one of these two fabrics. And then it gives me a nice roomy quilt. The big border is kind of fun because that's going to allow some really interesting machine quilting in that section, really allow that to shine. and I think it's just going to be fun. So that is my current plan. I will keep you guys updated with this project as I work my way through. If you have questions about using the Cupcake Mix recipe paper, let me know. These can be purchased in local and online quilt shops, as well as the layer cake size, which would make an even larger project if you were looking for something even larger and you are a collector of layer cakes. That might be a really nice option for you. But let me know if you have any questions about this tutorial, and also homespun questions so that I can answer those for you as well. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll catch you again next time.